Welcome to the Y.B. Min Lecture Series offered by the Center for Asian Business at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, California. This program is funded by a grant from the International Communications Foundation in Seoul, Korea. I hope you enjoy the program. Thank you.
Hi everyone, nice to see you. He mentioned that you guys are probably all experts on K-pop, and so now I'm rethinking my presentation, which usually goes, what is K-pop? It starts from the ABCs. He also mentioned my background, and people always put pause when they go, wait, before you worked at CJ, you worked at a school and you were doing community leadership and NGO. Like, what does that possibly have to do with Korean entertainment? And when I was moving over, I said, well, my previous job used to be possibly about kind of creating Asian American leadership. And my new job is about making Asian culture an important part of the conversation. And we always thought that that cultural leadership is part of making something relevant and crossing borders and transnational. So my job when I got hired at CJ Entertainment, which was as a marketing person, was basically to make Hallyu, or being Asian, cool. And we'll see how that's going. So first of all, see, I told you, the basics. What is Hallyu? I think I joked about, on the title that I put up, it's everything K. Especially in Korea, it is just really kind of expanded, and now we ourselves from Korea brand everything with K. So it started off with K-pop, but then, Latin American TV, you call them telenovela. We call Korean TV K-drama. So it's just been KKK. That's unfortunate. Sorry. Anyways, food, idol, beauty, drama, fashion. And it's interesting. It's actually, so it's a perfectly fine Korean word, and it sounds like it's Korean, but it was actually coined in China. And those characters happen to be pronounced the same in Chinese as well as in Korean. So it's Hallyu. And it was coined back in 1999 by a journalist who was very unhappy and worried that there was too much Korean content flowing into China and just talking about it as some sort of an invasion. In Korea, we often call it Hallyu, or, for non-Koreans who we think can't pronounce Hallyu, we say Korean wave, because it's the flowing like a wave. And we often look at it as soft power, which also is not as weird as you think. Again, back in the 90s. In 1994, we had a Korean president who specifically said, Korea needs to transition from an old industrial economy, making cars, building ships. We need to go to the next stage. We need to be part of, we need to have cultural products. We need to get more high tech. Just this idea that you have of countries all over the world kind of going up the, what would you call it? This is where my being sick kind of comes through. The food chain, as it were, I guess, of global economies. So, and he's cited specifically, listen, the revenue, the box office, from a single movie makes as much money as if we exported 1.5 million Hyundai automobiles. That was a big deal. Like, how could you take something like your country is built on this idea of an economic miracle, you're doing all these things, you're exporting to the world, you feel pretty good about yourself, and then you have like a single movie that comes out, it seems like fantasy, some sort, and just on screens all around the world, and it makes as much money. Second part, that's unstated in this, so that's back in 94. This idea of creative economy even applies now. When the current president, Park Geun-hye, came into power, one of her platforms is talking about creative economy. Now, that should probably have meant more things like biotech and innovative startups, but it also really put people to look at the role of K-pop and K-drama. Like, is this a business? And what can we do taking culture out into the world as a business. And that's been really interesting to see. Because it's something that I don't think anybody would have thought could be successful. Korea, I mean, if many of you study things in Asia, obviously the Korean language is not widely spoken. Korea as a country does not have very many people, so there's not a real natural audience beyond Korea for this content. But it's been very interesting to see it expand. It really, I think some of the milestones, I mean, so you guys are probably fans of the content currently, but some of the milestones, you can already go back to the early 2000s. Winter Sonata becomes this really big milestone, 겨울연가, and it was played in Japan in 2003, even though I think it had been on Korean TV like the year before, something like that. And it was on the NHK satellite channel, but it got like 20% primetime ratings, which is huge. And what do we see coming out of that? We saw tourism start to happen. Like people would come and try to find, like tourists from Japan would start coming to Korea and look for all the locations that the Winter Sonata, the TV show, was shot. So there would be like a particular cafe in Gangwon-do. These areas that they went to became part of almost like a tourist meccas. And that was the beginning. And then the year right after that, in 2004, 대장금, the Jewel in the Palace, which is actually a really great show, which you shouldn't watch if you're hungry, because it's all about cooking. It's this really idea of, you know, this palace cook and what she goes through. Not a very typical drama. It became the #1 watched show in Taiwan. That's just one of its accolades that it got. But it became hugely popular around the region. And I think these two shows really in tandem kind of like started things off on a roll. And people, then it became this normal thing to look at, you know, oh, what's the next drama coming out of Korea? Korean dramas are interesting, or actually, maybe they're more similar to, say, like British shows. The US has a model where we syndicate, so it's better for us to just drag that story out as long as possible. In the American TV industry, you don't really start making money on your TV shows until about year 3. Like this idea, you need 100 episodes, and then you can start selling, although with Netflix and Amazon, that's changing. Korean TV, the basic structure is that you have about a 16-episode arc, and it's you're one and you're done. So the story moves really fast. You start, the general kind of, if you look at the flow of the structure, you start first 2 episodes like, bam, you're like really like going through lots and lots of storyline, setting things up, and then it kind of slows down a little bit, and then for, you know, more exposition, character development, less about plot and story, kind of goes here and there, and then near the end it kind of starts to speed up again and gets tied together. So it's very satisfying, and in some ways it's interesting now because as we increasingly look at things on digital services and you can binge watch Korean dramas just the way they are as a business, they're very conducive to binge watching because you can get through your 16 episodes, usually about an hour each in a weekend, and a lot of people do that. So K-drama started the wave. I would say that Korean drama is still really strong, obviously. These are 2 examples just in this last, much more recently. My Love from the Star, 별에서 온 그대, just your standard drama. You have alien love, time travel, this idea of rebirth, regeneration. This show did really well. I mean, it did obviously well in Korea, but it did so well that apparently in China it was streamed 14.5 billion times between December of 2013 and February of 2014. And in March, there was an interesting article in the Washington Post where they reported on a meeting of a Chinese political advisory body called the CPCC. And the article states, they spent the whole morning bemoaning why China can't make a show as good as and as big of a hit. Quote, it is more than just a Korean soap opera. It hurts our cultural dignity, one CPCC member said. Good and bad. And it's interesting to think of this now because right now, since about this summer, Korean TV products, stars, music, concerts are pretty much banned. in China because of this fear of undue influence. So, if you go, I mean, or first they were taken off the air, and then which is why all the online platforms had them, and now it's another upheaval in that you had TV shows which were already recorded like months ago, featuring Korean stars in them being played on Chinese television with their faces blurred out. So just extracting Korean content off of Chinese air. It's not odd to see. I mean, I think in Asia we've always been really concerned about maintaining our culture and worried about cultural invasion from other places. Certainly when I was growing up in Korea, we had a huge ban on Japanese culture because this idea of being taken over and losing our identity in the process is important. But the flip side, as the original idea was, being soft power is really important, and it's been a really interesting way for Korea to get out into the world and to become known, and to have people who would otherwise never be interested in Korea kind of learn the language, learn the food, travel. The Korean Creative Content Agency, KOCA, did a study recently, or a few years ago, and they found that as a business, interestingly, in both music and television, Korean content is the third most consumed type of content. And you go, how could that possibly be? Well, they kind of create these big buckets. But the first bucket in both cases is anything English language, right? So music, English, British pop, any of these, whatever groups, all fall into obviously the biggest market. Second is Latin music, obviously so many countries. And then the third most consumed just across the world happens to be K-pop. You look over on the television side, the drama side, it actually is the same. The most consumed TV content in the world that crosses all borders is, shows like Game of Thrones. But then you also have telenovela, which are hugely popular through multiple countries. And then next comes K-drama. That is somewhat fascinating because, where is Bollywood in there? Bollywood probably is the third most or second most consumed form of movies, but the music and the dramas have not been the case. So this is, a form of Korea's diplomacy to the world. And I mean, I emphasize this partly because I work as, I'm part of the business, but we're also sitting in a business school. And I think this is the part that sometimes gets lost in the discussion about K-pop, because it usually focuses on that it's pink and it's pretty and it's happy. And we'll see a little bit of that later, though, too. So more recently this year, Descendants of the Sun was hugely, hugely popular. Actually, the actor who's there, it was really interesting. Again, an interesting storyline, kind of unexpected. It's set within Korean military. And so the guy is a Korean military person. She is a doctor, and they're on a peacekeeping mission in the Middle East, in some fictional country. Not your usual fare that you would assume would be, Korean family drama set in a corporation, and fighting over the right to marry someone, and who's going to become the heir. There's a lot of that too. But the reason that it's so popular is that you do see these different types of stories happening. That actor, this was his first show after coming out of his mandatory military service, so it's really kind of interesting how they drafted off of that, putting him in the military garb. I think before he went to the military, nobody would have believed him as a military man. He's one of these very, very what we call flower boy types in Korea. But for him to do that and be super successful, I think that was amazing. And he's probably one of the biggest stars with commercial value, doing ads and whatnot throughout Asia right now. Just a few years later, now we have almost simultaneous airing across global platforms. So it goes on air in Korea, and within hours, you've seen it in China, you've seen it in the United States. A single episode of this show, Descendants of the Sun, hit 2.3 billion views on, I can't pronounce it, iQIYI, the exclusive Chinese distributor, in 3 days. And then the show generated 10.3 billion searches on Weibo. So a lot of interest, I guess. And then, so K-drama, really, it provides the engagement. Actually, I think the reason I also want to, people know about K-pop and YouTube, but the reason I want to talk about K-drama is I think K-drama is the fertile ground, like the base that created the most engaged viewers, because you have context. Like you're watching the story, you know all the different people. It's not just one slice from the culture. It's you're kind of immersed in it, and that's also why Hollywood movies and TV shows have been so important in exporting the idea of America around the world, because you have a whole storyline, what family life looks like, what people do with their friends, where they go. It's this very humanizing, very idealized view that everybody gets to be to see. So, but anyways, so K-drama is obviously the big part of Hallyu. And then K-pop, I think this is where we've seen the real numbers, or these are the numbers that everybody knows. I reluctantly put Psy in there because, well, I shouldn't be reluctant. I mean, the man has the most watched video of all time, like all time still. Like you would think that this would have passed by now. Like, this happened back in 2012, like something else. So Psy, the reason that I'm reluctant is that Psy is not considered traditionally K-pop. Like he's just not. I mean, he's a very interesting performer, artist within the Korean music industry. He's always had his own voice, kind of gone his own way. Just is a social commentator. When he started, he would perform. Nobody knew who he was. Like he'd have a mask and all of these things. And then when he finally came out, they're like, "Oh my gosh, you're this pudgy, like mid-30s guy. Like you're totally not the normal star." But it was just this, force of personality that got him through, which I think is really great. And it comes through in the Gangnam Style video and his, other subsequent videos. But yeah, 2.64 billion views of all time. And that's when all the stories started coming out. Like, what is going on? Why? And it was just, the fact that the most watched video of all time is a Korean music video, which is completely incomprehensible to anybody, is a really interesting phenomena in this age. The more representative group is probably Big Bang, among many, many others. I'm not going to insult any other fandoms. I've learned not to do that. But this is just Big Bang last year. So or every year they do these like celebrity rankings, whatever. They were the number 54 on the Forbes Celebrity 100. Like this is a global list, and they earned $44 million. And the factoid is that only One Direction and the Backstreet Boys have earned more in a single year. So that talks to, they're not just big on YouTube. They're doing concerts. They're active all around Asia and beyond, and we'll see that a little bit. This was in Billboard this year in May. They had dug up a whole bunch of facts. The hardest thing about talking about K-pop and K-drama to people is that there are very little statistics that are publicly available that help you contextualize, because it's not something that's just tracked on a general level. So I had to do some digging, and these are not, I mean, I wish I could say, give you more like hard facts, because I like to have real context, but it's all kind of relative, but, just take away from it what you will. So the tops, this is data about K-pop concerts from 2013 through 2016, and these are the top 3 countries with the most K-pop concerts abroad. So Japan, 690, China, 130, USA, 102 in that time. That's pretty impressive, actually, because Japan has 690 K-pop concerts in this 3-year span. During the same time in Korea, there's 208 K-pop concerts. There's actually 3 times more K-pop concerts happening in Japan than there are in Korea. Now, that's pretty impressive. There's also reasons for that. I mean, in Korea, you have at least 3 if not 4 really famous music shows where our artists are appearing on weekly. They're appearing on variety shows. They're appearing on their dramas. Like if you're in Korea, you're watching a lot of K-pop all over the place. You don't really need to go to a concert. So the concerts are kind of these special, like they do birthday or, SM Family concert or YG Family concerts. But they do, most of their activity abroad is through concerts, because K-pop is usually not carried on TV or on air, and this is the chance to meet their fans. If you look at the numbers in terms of the most attended concert tour, so the Big Bang Made 2015 World Tour had 750,000 people across 65. The second, interestingly, which I think if you're an American fan you're not as aware of, is TVXQ, 동방신기. Their tour did only 16 concerts, and they almost have the same number, because TVXQ is huge in Japan. Huge, huge, huge. In fact, we had them here, or I saw them here, and you saw like busloads of Japanese tourists coming to LA just to see the tour because they were here. And so, yeah, it means that they've averaged out sellouts, or averaged like 46,000 people per concert during their Japan tour. So really big numbers. EXO is obviously here. EXO is the newest, kind of star to come along, although I think more recently that's getting overshadowed by BTS, who are fantastic, and I'm going to say we got to have them first in the United States. So all these names also, if you notice, if you're a fan, you don't need the explanation otherwise, but people have cited the fact that generally K-pop groups have English names or acronyms that make it easy to understand or to remember them. The songs usually have hooks, and then there's a lot of Korean in them, but there's also some English hooks in there as well, so that these songs were kind of built for a global audience beyond Korea, and that probably attributes to some of their success. So this part I think is very self-explanatory. Because, if you don't know about it, you wonder, oh, well, how did people get access to it? Because, it's not on any major media. I think Hallyu is a really, really good example of how alternative media has found an audience anywhere. And this is like self-broadcasting. You can do whatever. I think everybody talks about YouTube as being the main pathway of discovery, at least initially. And still now, for K-pop. It's just, hugely influential. And then, I say more specifically social media and the fans. So you no longer have giant media networks telling you what to watch. You listen to your friends and what your friends see, and want to oh, they found something and they're, sharing it with you. And so I think the rise of fan culture is not limited just to K-pop. If you look at things like Game of Thrones, that's fan culture. If you look at Star Wars, that's fan culture. More and more media companies as a business should look at fan culture and probably organize themselves vertically around verticals of certain fan orientation, because it's the most effective way these days in a fractured environment to talk to people. So Digital Life, you guys, just in case you're interested in the sites, these are MAU is like monthly average users. Some of these numbers might be inflated or old. It just depends. But you hear the same numbers again and again. So if you're a K-pop fan, or K-drama fan, a lot of your time is spent online because you're looking at news. This is just, I like this page from All K-pop. This is from today. So most discussed over the last month was, Korean armies criticized for being inconsiderate. Army is BTS's fandom. CL goes under fire for once again there's some controversy that she's using some words from the Quran in her new tour, but come on, the tour is called Hello Bitches, so I don't know that anybody should be offended. Let's see, third one, I can't even read it. Netizens get in a heated debate after something. EXO fans are angry at IOI's Pinky. And Twice almost gets a whopping 6 million views on something. So lots and lots of controversy. You can tell these are the most highly viewed or most discussed aspect of videos. Obviously, this is all in English, so this is more for global fans. Korean fans probably are using different platforms, more or less Naver. And then the news, right? Watch teens react. So if you notice, all the reaction videos, or the biggest reaction videos are mostly non-Korean. This whole idea of reaction videos is pretty much a non-Korean thing, and it's fantastic. Actually, we invite a lot of them to KCON, and they're so engaged and engaging. And then like Lee right now is in the military, so somebody saw him and like is reporting on life. These are the things that drive your fandom. Like people want to know. People want to know everything of what's going on. So all K-pop, Sunpi, Korea Boo, probably countless others. I like that graphic on the right. Like, where are you watching? Probably, if you're a US fan, you're probably watching on Viki or Drama Fever. If you're really hardcore and you don't need subtitles, you're probably on demand Korea. And then, which pretty much covers the whole gamut. Viki and Drama Fever are the most global platforms, and then they serve audiences around the world. They both do subtitles almost immediately, and Viki is a fan-subbed site, which I think recently I saw some infographic that they passed like 2 billion subtitles. So really, really, this same idea of community, people subbing, subtitling Korean language into 20, 30 other languages for viewing around the world. And I mean, people probably know already, but Viki bought Sunpi. Warner Brothers now owns Drama Fever, but before that it was owned by SoftBank in Japan. I mean, these are venture startups that have been bought and sold as well. And Viki is actually now owned by Rakuten, which is the Amazon of Japan. So interestingly, the two biggest Korean content global platforms were for a time both owned by Japanese companies, which Koreans get very nervous about. So interesting. Okay. This brings me to KCON, and actually for a video interlude. I was explaining when I was setting up the video that it's kind of a long one, and it's just taken from KCON, but like I've talked about it a lot, but this gives you a little bit of a glimpse. So KCON, I said everything K, our motto for KCON is all things Hallyu. KCON, this idea of having a concert and convention is actually an American one. I mean, we started KCON here in the US, and now it's going out to different places in the world. I mean, we started here at CJ, but it was really this idea of, that previous graphic, so much of a fan's life is spent online, that we wanted to have an event that people could meet each other, see their, beyond just a concert. See the star, obviously, and get excited about that, but just this very, very large event that would bring all these different people together to have an in-person live engagement. And ironically, I think after we started KCON about 2 years, I had a conversation with the guys over at Full Screen. Full Screen is a really big, at a certain point, was doing extremely well. MCN, right, a YouTube channel. And they were creating all these channels, and we were like, oh, wow, you guys have so much scale. That would be so great. Like your business sounds so great. And they're like, no, but what we really want to do is events. I'm like, you're kidding me, right? Like nobody wants to do events. Events are hard. They don't scale, in the current parlance. Why do you want to do events? They're like, and what we saw, it's the ultimate connection between the more virtual and online something is, the more important events are getting. And we see that actually all across the industry. Like more people are going on tour because that's where the money is. But it's also when so much of something is just on screen, you need events for the engagement to happen. And I think we'll continue to see the importance of events, or this idea, as I said before, wrapping yourself completely around a fandom and doing, in our case, we would do online, on air, because we have cable as well, and on site, and just have this whole complete fan experience. So just to show that Eric Garcetti, he did say this, and I have tape of it, but I don't have it in this thing. Long live K-pop, right here in LA. And Irene Kim was interesting. She was at KCON as a speaker, but this goes to the idea of the K-beauty, because she's considered a global beauty ambassador. So let's see the video.
Earlier this summer, we took you to the first East Coast K-pop convention, but that was nothing compared to this. We are at the mothership, KCON.
This weekend, the largest annual celebration of all things Korean entertainment and pop culture.
And my heart starts beating, and my lungs start breathing, and the voice in my head starts screaming, I'm alive. You're like a laser light burning down on me. You're like a laser light burning down on me. You make me feel good, you make me feel safe, you make me feel like I can live another day. You make me feel good, you make me feel safe, you know I wouldn't have it any other way. David shit.
Welcome you to KCON 2015 at the Staples Center in Los Angeles.
너에게 해줄 수 있는 나의 유일한 선물이었지.
너에게 아무도 몰래 단 한 번의 기회를 눈앞에 시야 가운데 더욱 날카롭게 All my ladies, ladies in the air. All my ladies, in front in the air. 그녀는 그냥 나 미치게 해. 그녀는 세아주게 해. 마치 넌 제대로 된 상대를 만나서 난 태어날 때 태어났지 수백 년.
Ignite your feels and countdown. Feels in New York starts now.
나를 놓치기 싫어, 나를 더 만지기 싫어. 사뿐사뿐 걸어가 장미꽃이 걷어서 그대에게 안겨줄 거야. 영상 보여줄 거야. 우리 분위기 잡아 장난 아니야. 기대한 보다 뜨겁게 날 비추는 나를 봐. 꿈처럼
that video because that was cut together in Korea and it had a lot of the concert footage. Because for some people who don't know, I think it's really interesting to see each and every act and then who the fans are and how they're reacting. All of those fan signs are homemade. I think just every time I'm at KCON, I'm always bowled over because I think it's just incredible what's going on. So that, I think it's a really good snapshot of seeing, and anybody who wants to come to KCON to understand Hallyu in Los Angeles, you can, obviously come to the concert, but you can also just come to the convention. It's, just spend your day surrounded by fans and see what's going on. I think it's a pretty incredible experience. In effect, if you've been to KCON, you've seen this. So what started with K-pop and K-drama, there's definitely been this kind of halo effect, at the risk of using K way too many times. So K-beauty is probably getting the most tangible results. You see, this is from the Wall Street Journal. Since 2014, Amore Pacific, which is one of the biggest brands, they own a bunch of Korean beauty brands. They've seen 4 times quadruple rise in their stock valuation because everybody sees they're selling more across the world, and it's kind of riding behind K-pop and K-drama. You've watched the stars, you think they're really pretty. How do I get that look? Oh, these are the special products that they use. I think there's a joke about the Korean beauty routine. It's like the 11-step K-beauty routine, which is really complicated or sounds really complicated. But if you want to get that look, that's what you're going to do. I think, one of the things that most surprised me last year, was it last year? I think it was last year. Just walking by a Sephora store and seeing these giant posters of K-beauty. So it's like trending at Sephora, K-beauty skincare. And then they have all these different ways that you can access K-beauty. And I thought that was maybe just in the US, but actually in putting this together, I found this slide, which you can hardly see, but it's actually all in Spanish. And it talks about an event that they're going to do in Barcelona, that Sephora in Spain is doing around K-beauty. So really, who would have thought? Korean food, obviously. Korean food is interesting because, there's obviously people like us who sell Korean food, but then the US has an interesting dynamic that some of the most exciting chefs in recent years who kind of do, David Chang or Roy Choi with Kogi, those are Korean American chefs doing stuff with Korean food that have always had a lot of play with, people like Anthony Bourdain, but it's just kind of all getting interest together. And then we have cultural centers, Korean cultural centers all over the world telling us how their class sizes have just gotten so big in recent years due to the K-pop and K-drama. So, you guys know better than I, but why Hallyu, why now? I think it's a confluence of factors, the technology and the openness. K-pop came along at the right time when you had a global video platform that was individually shareable, but it was also some of the first premium content, stuff that looked really good and looked really hot on YouTube. Like when everything else was cat videos, you had K-pop videos. So it stood out. And then you had audiences, especially in not just the US, but around, there's a big kind of a bubble of millennial age, but it's also a generation that overall is seen to be much more multicultural and culturally open to different types of experiences, or, to some extent just wanting something for yourself. As I said, tribes, this community or fandoms, the transition from an expert-driven culture to more of a social-driven culture. You're no longer listening to somebody tell you what the good things are, but you want your friends to discuss what you think is good. And Professor Peck knows this because I went into this at another panel. I think it actually also has something to do with, this is my pet theory, and this is not at all proven out, so this is completely anecdotal, but I think that K-pop and K-drama represents so-called female gaze. So if Hollywood fare is generally very like male gaze, objectified women, lots of just male-oriented storylines, and we've talked about that or heard about that in the media a lot. Korean content tends to be objectified men, like really, really, really beautiful men who are perfect in every way, in the way that a girl would think about it. Like, he's nice, he's kind, he's smart, he's what, all these things. Or like, even though he seems like he's mean, he secretly loves you. So I think, you know, the K-pop idols and the Korean drama, the storylines, and actually the writers, the people who write the dramas are generally women. So whereas in the US, generally most TV writers happen to be men. So it's this reverse. So, I mean, this is just an answer to the question of why. I mean, because people go, well, people have their own, outside of Korea. Obviously, if you're Korean, this is your culture, so you just watch it. But if you're outside of Korea, why would you go for something different, like Korean dramas? And it's because it, I think, speaks to parts of the culture that you are not getting otherwise. If everything else is very, you know, male-dominated or machismo, then Korean culture is a little bit different. That's just a personal theory that I have. But it's also, they're extremely addictive, and then you start watching, and then, you know, this whole like kind of theorizing goes out the door. And I think that, this is my last slide, so I think that in general, that you can see that Hallyu is an interesting phenomenon in and of itself, but there's a lot of things in it. It's not just unique to Hallyu. Like, you see it, and you can see where youth culture in general is going. So, you know, as I said, from the business side, now we have services like HBO Go or Vice, you know, doing their own OTT. The first true OTTs were, that actually kind of became very popular, were what I said earlier, Drama Fever and Viki, right? You know, Netflix, Hulu, they cover everything. Drama Fever and Viki, if you think about it, were one of the first ones who made viable niche programming on their own subscriber basis as an OTT. And that has just, you know, that trend has just grown everywhere. The idea of alternative content on media consumption, I think I've made that point quite a bit. And rise of K-pop and K-drama, and just this very multicultural audience. And I've seen it, you know, every day that I'm standing at KCON, I'm just bowled over by just the diversity of people and voices and interests, and everybody is just so generous and happy to be there. And I think that it's a very hopeful sign of a more multicultural cultural landscape that's going to come in the future. So. K-pop is a lot like what you consider Motown. I mean, you know, the model that we had with Motown, and I say that because, you know, and sometimes people say, oh, it's very manufactured. I was like, well, Motown was very manufactured. It's this idea of, there's the best known, there's three major companies that are very well known. SM Entertainment, which is basically, and they all happen to be initials for these particular people. So SM stands for Lee Soo-man, YG is Yang Hyun-suk, but where does the G come from? I don't know. And then JYP is Park Jin-young, and they each of them were actually performers in their own right, and they kind of got into producing, and then they started with this idea of creating trainees. So they all have, Lee Soo-man's probably his first big success was this singer called Boa, and Boa, I think, was her older sister came to an audition, and he said, oh, but how about you? Why don't you try something? And then she did. And so I think she started, you know, becoming a trainee like when she was maybe 9 or 10. You know, learned Japanese, learned dance, learned acting, learned singing, learned everything. And so this idea of becoming like a perfect performer in all aspects of what you do. And then there's groups, right? There's a lot of multi-group people, so that you have multiple trainees being, you know, working together for a number of years to become a group. So that's been, I mean, I think that's a fairly replicated model. There's a lot of groups. There's this idea of synchronicity, working hard. I think these play well with kind of what people consider Korean cultural values, or the cultural values that Korean education system and, you know, culture tries to instill. You know, work hard, work together, in harmony. and be successful. And so it can seem to critics, sometimes it seems like overly controlled. But what I've seen from fans is that huge appreciation for the amount of work that's been gone into it. Like, these guys didn't just sit there and, mope about something and like write some song on a guitar. Like, the idols have worked incredibly hard to get here, and then every single performance, like, they put it just all out on the floor. And that, I think, is also part of the attraction that we've seen, or at least cultivating the fandom as well. People are very appreciative in both ways. I don't dwell on it because I think it's just a flip side of a coin of, these performances and the songs have been extremely practiced and but it's almost like this idea of craft, right? They've been honed to this very high standard, and there's this sense that you have to really work on something before it's good enough to take it public, instead of just kind of like, oh, let it all hang out. And I think that might be part of, a Korean cultural thing. Like, you really want a very high quality of presentation. So the more feminine part, I mean, I talked about it a little bit before when I say I think it's this idealized, female gaze. I don't think that it represents like a whole new norm or anything. It's just a particular slice of spectrum in Korea, but that's become extremely popular. I mean, so the economics play a huge role, right? In Korea, in terms of views and popularity, you will see a lot of the girl groups do really well, right? The girl groups are huge. The boy bands are good, but sometimes just in the general culture, if you're Korean, the girl groups do better. Outside of Korea, that's absolutely not the case. It's all the boy groups, the male idols do much better. And that's because the fandom is much more female. And they're the ones who are buying the tickets to the concerts and buying the merchandise and all of that. How does that... I just think that it's popular because it's different. It's an alternative. It's much happier. I've had these conversations, and people also wanted to see what's new and different. I had a conversation last year just outside of KCON with like two women who were sitting outside. I should mention that they're African American, and I'm most curious about, if you're African American, what is in it K-pop? Because you consider a lot of urban music being like owned by African American. Like, so this is so different. What is it? And they were like, oh, we were at we went to KCON in New York. We live in Florida, in Orlando, and now we're here in LA. And oh, by the way, this is my third year here. 3 years ago, I was here and I discovered BTS for the first time, and it was fantastic. Last year I came because BTS was playing, but oh my God, there was Astro and Monsta X, and I saw them, and now like today my voice is hoarse because I was like cheering them on so much. And oh my goodness, tonight I saw Astro, because we always try to bring in one group that's very new, to who we think has some good, crossover potential in the United States. So it's discovery too, but it's this idea of something that's just different than what everybody else knows and sees. I think that's part of it. It depends on who the writers are. I mean, there's certain writers who are huge stars. Speaking of My Love from the Star, the writer of that's probably her... Wait, I'm getting confused. Is she the one, Secret Garden? Right, Hallyu was in Secret Garden, and then she also did My Love from the Star, I believe. It's the same writer. Okay. See, you're more current on your research. So certain writers are really huge. They do have this idea of the single heroic writer, but they do have a little bit of a writing staff. Some of the more famous writers actually have their own kind of writer academies where you train, and then you practice writing, and then you get admitted to a program as an intern, and so they kind of virtually create their writer's room. But it is a huge heroic effort on behalf of one main writer. In terms of the deals, though, I mean, it really is kind of there's the WGA. I mean, they're not these standard things that will sit there and protect you. And then because so many of the dramas used to be directly produced by the networks, but now the networks actually don't produce them themselves. It's mostly outside production companies, and they go on to the networks. To give you the corporate spiel, CJ runs 18 cable channels in Korea. Everything from Mnet, TVN to On Style, OCN, food, whatever, all just across the gamut. We have recently organized a new studio system. So all of our writers and directors used to be employees of CJE&M, and now we've kind of spun that out, called a new, more similar to the US system now, called Studio Dragon. And Studio Dragon actually owns 30% of like 4 other major writer-director combos, and including that writer. Exactly. So and now it's just kind of all grouped together. It's supposed to allow us to do bigger productions that are not just for CJ consumption. So now we're producing dramas for SBS and other networks as well. So the video is from 2015. It's the 2015 recap. I couldn't get the 2016 one was just like a sales video, and I just thought just show more stuff. So yes, so this year we had we kicked off the year in Abu Dhabi, and then there was Japan, 2 days in Japan. So last year was the first time. This year there was like 2 dates in Japan, and then France in May, and then LA and New York. And we were supposed to do one in China, but that got canceled along with most other Korean entertainment in China. So in terms of how we decide where to go, there is no kind of rhyme or reason to it. I mean, the US part of it, we just here were extremely adamant. I mean, I had a summer where I took like 36-hour trips to Korea, maybe like 6 or 7 times to convince people, hey, what I'm talking about. Like, what is this thing called KCON? Because they were like, but it's not a convention. Like, convention is what business people go to. I was like, you're not getting the point. Like, there's this idea. Like, it's like, and nobody had been to Comic-Con. Nobody had been to Anime Expo. They had no idea what this thing was. I was like, no, maybe it's a very American thing. Like, maybe this is just, if you're American, you like to go, be with people and participate. Like, this idea of participating is, I think, very American. And then so we started here in LA, and then we pushed to also expand it to New York, and that seemed to work out. But in between time, all of our colleagues in Korea said, this is never going to work in Japan. I was like, really? Why is that? And they said, because Japan already has this hugely saturated K-pop market. They already have the concerts. They're just so exposed to it. Like in the US, there's this, hunger or this drought of, experience that you can have. But in Japan, there's so much of it, nobody's going to come. But they're like, well, we have an Mnet in Japan. Maybe we should, help launch that. I mean, for us, KCON has been very beneficial in terms of getting sponsors and stuff onto our channel as well. And that's partly why we started it. So speaking of logic, they did it in Japan, and they were so surprised because all these people showed up, and what it was a much younger demographic than they had ever seen before. So K-pop has been around in Japan for so long that the demographic actually is like quite a bit older. Like if you go to the Dongbang concert, or you see the people who come by plane, they're people, who are my age, right? They're in their 40s, like they're excited. But the young people, and that's why people are concerned about Hallyu, how long is this going to last? Because is it just take hold of the imagination of a certain age and then it passes? But they saw at KCON in Japan this time that it was the older fans were there, and then a whole new slew of younger fans were there too. And it being Asia, they said that people are not as participatory. So like all the panels and stuff that we do where like people are talking or raising questions or, dancing, they're not as much into that. But in Japan, they do more things that show, like do demos where people can watch and observe. And so we kind of have to revise it for the different countries. Abu Dhabi was really, it happens, our company was founded by, as part of the CJ family who has this very, very strong vision of culture, but they also happen to be friends with media people all around the world. And so CJ, I think there's the Crown Prince family, and then they're interested, and they thought, oh, wouldn't this be great? And everyone thought, wow, are you serious that there's K-pop fans in the Middle East? And we said, yeah, there really are. But then the visuals, I really wanted to show that video because the visuals from that are quite amazing, because you had thousands of local fans coming out for K-pop. And the people in Abu Dhabi said that that was very weird for them, because actually most of the international concerts in Abu Dhabi, like it's a destination, like Lady Gaga will go to Abu Dhabi or whoever. It's all expats. It's, non-locals who are going to these concerts. But for the K-pop show, which they thought, who's going to come to this? It was actually all local fans who came. And so it's, part of it is our, corporate mission to just kind of take K-pop global and, provide a platform. But we'll see where it goes next year.